Hey everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar Pod on CLNS Media, powered by our good friends at Prize Picks and the Game Time app. Back with me on this episode of the Jungle Roar Pod, the one and only Kelsey Conway, doing a fabulous job covering the Cincinnati Bengals and all things NFL for that matter, as they are related to the Bengals, for Cincinnati.com and of course the Cincinnati Enquirer. How you doing, Kelsey?
I'm great. It's been a while since I've been on, so I'm happy to
It
be back
has
on
been
with
a
you.
while. Too long, Kelsey, too long. So we're going to make up for that with a great, jam-packed, highly energized Jungle Roar Pod. That's how we're going to make up for the fact.
Highly energized. I don't know if I've had enough coffee for
I'm
that.
going
I'm only
to get
on
you
coffee number
juiced up.
one.
I know you're in the middle of your morning beverage, whatever that is that you're sipping on. But we are going to get you jacked up and ready for some football. We finally saw some football on Saturday night. I want to ask you, Kelsey, what were your biggest takeaways from watching Joe Burrow in a competitive game for the first time Saturday night, even though it was just one series?
I think my general takeaway wasn't so much about like how he played. It's just the fact that he was able to do it. Like that's just got to be such a mental check the box for him and this entire organization. And, you know, you can say he looked sharp, and he did look sharp, and it was good to see him out going through the offense with the starters. But until they're really playing against a starting defense that is game planning for Joe, like, you know, like pump the brakes in that standpoint. But like, it's such a big deal for him and for the Bengals that he was even able to do that. And then he got through it without suffering an injury. Like, I can't imagine how, even though it was only a small sample size, how good that felt for him and what it could potentially propel him to be able to do earlier in the season. Because at the end of the day, like, he's human, and all of us as humans at some point, like if something happens to you as often as it has at the same time for the last couple of years, like at some point that's probably got to chip away at you, right? So I feel like that was my biggest takeaway.
I also thought it was not a mistake that Dan Pitcher called on some very quick passes to get him into some type of rhythm, and not only quick passes, but low risk passes. First throw he attempted on the night was that quick hitter off the line of scrimmage to T. Higgins. It was complete, a tight window, I might add. When I went back and looked at that throw, I'm like, that took some precision for him to complete that, even though it was whatever, 7 yards, and T gained, I think, another 2 or 3 yards. Then there was the pass for no gain to Chase Brown. What did you think of him getting into that rhythm, and how important it was, like you said, for him just to have the sense of throwing the football again?
I thought it was huge. And like you said, I mean, that was the plan all along. Zach told us, you know, he was going to be strategic in what he was able to call for Joe. But just seeing him get a full drive like that, like it wasn't just a 3 and out, you know, it was multiple reps for him. I thought it was really good. And again, you know, expectations should be tempered because of it's the preseason and the Bucs were not game planning and we're only playing 2 defensive starters. But it's kind of like along the lines of what Joe has been saying in any podcast or media interview he's done. Like, when you are injured and you're not playing, people forget about you. And it's like, I feel obviously everybody knows this, or the Bengals wouldn't have paid him what they did. And when he's been on the field, he's taken the Bengals to a Super Bowl and an AFC championship. But he's a really good quarterback. And I think he's going to remind everybody that as long as he can stay on the field and as long as they can protect him.
Did you read anything into his quiet, low-key post-game press conference?
No, because I try to not read into.
It's dangerous to do.
Yeah,
I know.
Especially with him. I did think it was interesting, but I don't know. Do you think maybe he doesn't want to get too excited, you know, because there's still like a month left before the season?
I think there's part of that. I think there is. I think
like
that absolutely part of that.
Play it cool type of vibe. Like, you don't want to get all, you know, yourself all worked up over playing in one preseason drive. I don't know, but I don't want to obviously speak for the situation and make things up. But that could be really the only thing. But I don't I try to
I
not read
just
anything
found it
into him.
interesting. It's just the whole dynamic with Joe. Because, obviously everybody's interested when he opens his mouth or when he holds a press conference, especially after a game, especially after I think he performed very well considering everything that we just spoke about. I thought he performed very well. And it was almost like he was going to pump the brakes on himself, on everybody reacting to it. Yes, I needed to get on the field. Yes, I needed to feel good, which I did. But there's still a lot of room to improve, and there's so much to be accomplished before that season opener on September 8th. I think that was the biggest message.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how he is. You and I will both be in Chicago this week. Right. And if he practices, well, he will practice. It's going to be mostly the starters. Like if he talks to the media after, if he has a different tone, I don't know. It'll be interesting to monitor him over the next couple of weeks for sure.
T. Higgins was in a very good mood Monday. We spoke to him at his locker after practice, and I got the sense that he felt like Joe was back. He was back in rhythm with Joe. He actually, and I thought he was kind of being tough on himself. Maybe not. He called the ball in the end zone, the deep post into double coverage, a drop. He said, I clearly should have had the ball. It was a drop, but it was right on the money. And, I think of all of the passes he threw, that was his best pass. It was on target, right where T could catch it. But he targeted T quite a bit on Saturday night 3 times. And I just got the sense in talking to T. Higgins that he felt good being back on the field with Joe.
Totally. And I think T is kind of in a similar boat as Joe in that T missed a bunch of games last year. And everybody has been, talking about like how good they think T's looked in camp, because he's been able to practice, and also because he's been getting all of the targets, mostly because Jamar isn't practicing as the number 1 receiver would get. And I think like T. Higgins is going to remind people that don't already know, like he's a top 10 receiver in the NFL. Yeah. Like that's been like the funny part. Oh, it's not funny, but wild to me that everybody, I feel like there's a pocket of people reacting to anything I've reported about what's been going on with the T. Higgins and Bengals saga for the last 2 years. It's like, right. Well, they just decided they'd rather pay Jamar Chase, and that's where all their money is going to go. And, they'll just draft the next T. Higgins. T. Higgins, like Bengals fans need to enjoy this season because they have 2 top 10 wide receivers on their team.
Right.
And if Jamar and T. Higgins are both healthy, that is the best duo in the NFL. And Troy Walters came on my podcast last week, and he said he thinks T. Higgins isn't the top 10 receiver. He's the top 7 receiver. And everyone, of course, knows how good that duo is, but T wasn't able to stay on the field as much as he would have liked last year. So I think that this is it's a big season for so many people. For Joe, proving that he can stay healthy and that he is the top quarterback you expected him to be last year before he got injured. Jamar Chase, say he doesn't get the contract that he wants, he's going to want to prove everything this season because he wants his new contract. And then same for T. Higgins, he's going to, all signs basically point to him being headed to free agency next year. So he needs to play well to prove that A, he can stay healthy, and B, he deserves the number 1 type of receiver type of money. So that's what I think makes this season so interesting for the Bengals is a lot of people have things to prove, which usually means you get the best out of them.
That's a great point, Kelsey. I want to ask you the next question. Characterize for fans what the plan is. I got to get in my camera shot here. The plan is regarding Jamar Chase. We keep hearing from Zach. There is a plan in place for the number 1 receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, who has attended everything that he's been required to attend. It's called a sit-in for a reason. He's not on campus for the Bengals. He is actually in the building, in the facility. He's just not practicing. In terms of what your perception of the plan is, what do you think it is?
I'm going to be careful with this one because I'm not trying to start a news cycle here on the Jungle Roar podcast.
I'm not trying to get you in deep doo-doo here with anybody, but I think people want to know when's Ja'Marr going to be back on a football field playing football? And secondly, is this going to stretch into the regular season? Those are two questions fans are rightly wondering about, and it's a fair question to ask.
You know, what's funny is I put out a clip of my podcast with Troy Walters, and it was talking about Andre Yoshivas. And under the clip, there were some comments about nothing else, but basically to short summarize it, basically the only story about the Bengals receivers right now that you should be talking about is what's going on with Ja'Marr Chase, which is funny to me because there's been a pocket of fan reaction that's been stop reporting on it every day. We get it. He's not practicing. When we've all sent out the tweets that have been like,
I think that was fine a couple of weeks ago to say, well, he's not practicing.
Right.
Big deal. We'll get to it when we get, now we're
right.
What,
so that's kind of leading me to my next point is like, it has been such a non-story because first of all, Ja'Marr Chase hasn't been a diva. Like, he's here. He's engaged with his teammates. He's smiling. He's talking to Zach Taylor during practice. He's I saw him the other day, Pat Duke Tobin on the back. Like, he is such an anti-diva that's why this isn't like a story. It's not like CeeDee Lamb, where CeeDee Lamb hasn't shown up. Brandon Ayuk, I don't believe, has been like out at practice for the 49ers. Not like saying that's 100%. I just think of the clips I've seen.
I get the drift.
I haven't seen Ayuk as like involved at practice. It's been such a non-story because the Bengals and Ja'Marr have made it a non-story right now with Zach's messages of not coming out and saying contract, even though we all know that a perfectly healthy Pro Bowl caliber receiver not practicing for, believe that today will be 14 days. We're reading between the lines, and it is what it is. Joe Burrow basically told us when he said, he's going through what I was going through last year, and that was Joe wanted a contract last year, Ja'Marr wants a contract, etc. It's about to become a story, though, a bigger story, because everyone's just assuming that, and yes, he is an absolute freak, that he just can come back and turn it on. But how many times have we gone to week one when like Joe hasn't been out there and T. Higgins, remember in Cleveland last year, the story was after like the timing was off for the receivers because Joe didn't practice. Yeah. And it's like every player at their peak, even the best athletes in the world, which Ja'Marr Chase is, needs time to practice to get themselves back, into game shape. Right. And so I think that the longer this goes, like I'll be interested. I don't think he'll practice in Chicago, because why would you practice in Chicago all of a sudden and just not participate, not have like some sort of ramp up? Like they're not just going to toss him in and be like, yeah, hey, you're wide receiver number one. That would just be silly. But that Indy week next week, that's the one I have circled, because if he's not practicing or doing anything more than what he's doing, then it gets dicey to just go out and assume that he's going to be able to take all the reps week one, and everything's going to go all as planned, if he even decides, So I think it's about to get interesting, right? Don't you?
I do, and I would like to see him not playing a game necessarily, but like you said, with the Indianapolis joint practice coming up next Tuesday, that would be a week from today as we record this. This whole preseason is compressed very tightly in this, whatever it is, 17, 18-day window. And the Bengals are only going to have one practice to themselves Monday. Then they'll have the joint practice on Tuesday. The final preseason game is Thursday. And there's part of me that thinks, well, screw it. They're not even going to worry about him getting into any preseason activity until after the final preseason game and then worry about ramping up then. I do not think at this particular point he's going to sit out a regular season game. I just don't see that happening.
I don't see that happening either, but I mean, you can never say never, right?
No.
But I'm with you. Like, everything we know about Ja'Marr Chase, like, he's not that type of person, but this really is like the biggest leverage point he's had in his career so far. So, you can never say never, but I agree with you. I would be completely stunned if that, but I guess when you space out the calendar like that, like, if he doesn't do anything in Indy, there's still like almost 2 weeks. Yeah. I think I was missing a week, right? Like 2 weeks would be enough for him to get back into shape, even though, like Joe said, they only need like one session. I think that would be like enough.
I almost think that was Joe dropping a hint that don't expect him to be doing anything right now.
Well,
but maybe I'm reading it wrong.
No, I agree with you. It makes sense because if Ja'Marr was to go out and get injured right now, like, it's God forbid he tore an ACL or something, that significantly changes what he would get in a contract. Like, I get it for him with his current contract situation, and it is what it is. Like, it's the rookie deal, but like, I get his side 100%. And if you've decided 14 practices you're not doing, why all of a sudden would you just sprinkle in the last 3 against, another opponent where you can't really control what they're going to do? Like, I'm sure the plan is that when he is ready to come back, it'll be in a controlled environment. Zach will have a full plan in terms of, like, he's going to take these reps, whatever. They'll do everything they can to protect him because, as Mike Brown told us at the luncheon, priority number 1 for the Cincinnati Bengals is number 9, and priority number 2 is number 1.
All right. Amarius Mims, how disappointing was that for the Bengals when Zach Taylor announced, I think to a lot of our surprise, certainly almost shock, that Amarius Mims would be out several weeks with a strained pec?
I know. How about that? That totally threw me for a loop yesterday because you didn't see anything happen in the game. So I don't think any of us, most of the time we go in with a list of questions. I mean, just what a tough blow is what my reaction to that, because I'm not sure, since I started covering the team, I've heard as many coaches glow about a player in his first training camp in the way that they have all glowed about Amarius Mims. And I wrote a story about him a couple weeks ago on Cincinnati.com. And I thought the most interesting thing, and having interacted with offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher enough now to this point, like, he's a very serious guy, and compliments from him, I believe, are hard to come by. He said something to me that I thought was really interesting. Is we spent all the time in the pre-draft process reading about how people would say physical freak, athletic ability is unmatched, but there was always a but only played 8 games at Georgia, but injuries, whatever. There was always a but with Mims, and that's why they claimed he fell to 18 where the Bengals took him. And he was so forthcoming in saying that, you think as much as you can about these guys in the pre-draft process through the interview process, but you really don't know until they get there and you see them every day. And he said, sometimes you think you read all the clippings that he only played 8 games, and you then automatically wonder, okay, does this guy like really love football? Like, is he really in it? And he was like, it couldn't be further than like what Amarius Mims actually is. And that is a really coachable guy who loves football. Like the narrative that he maybe didn't want to come back and play at Georgia last year, that's not what they're saying about him. They think he is going to be a really good player for this team for a long time. And I thought that was just really interesting to hear about him. But what a tough blow. And I hope that for him, he's not out, too long, because that'd be a hard break to come back from all the progress that he's been making.
I was talking with Tony Pike on the sideline on Monday, and the point he was making is it's one thing to have the injury, but as a rookie offensive tackle in the National Football League, missing the reps against competition, which is how you really improve and get up to game speed and have a chance realistically to start in the NFL as a rookie offensive tackle. That's what you really need are those reps. And he's going to miss those reps. And to expect him to miss, let's say 3 weeks, and then just step right in against New England in week 1 and play starting right tackle is a stretch to him. Maybe he can do it. And maybe they, and Zach Taylor was very adamant, I thought, for Zach Taylor, in saying Monday, we're not ruling anything out. We don't want to take week 1 off the table. Maybe they're being optimistic. Maybe they really think that this isn't which I think Jay Morrison asked it toward the end of the press conference. This isn't as significant of an injury as it might appear. It could have been a lot worse. It's non-surgical, and he called it a very minor issue. Well, if it's extremely minor, and it doesn't require surgery, I think their hope is that if they don't get him back for week 1, certainly they'd love to have him back week 2 against Kansas City.
Well, you know what I just thought as you said that? Mm-hmm. Say he is physically able to start week 1, but they're not comfortable with it because he's just gotten back. Like how much attention is going to be on Trent Brown staying healthy to get to week 1 so that they don't have to force Mims in if they don't believe he's
Correct.
Ready. Like
we haven't even talked about that. Yes.
Because if Trent Brown is gets some sort of injury over the next couple of weeks and he's not ready to go, even if Mims is cleared, they'd like to probably ramp him back up. And you have the luxury of doing that if Trent Brown can play, right? But say Trent Brown gets hurt, then you're looking at putting Mims. Then you're looking at putting Mims cleared, but you wouldn't love to play him.
Right.
You might have to because of the need to want to win that game, and you feel like he's your best option. So I don't know. Like this is going to be super interesting because Trent Brown has to stay healthy for this to not be an issue for them and for them to give Mims the time he needs to not only just get cleared, but like get comfortable again, I think.
I'm not going to judge too much off Joseph Osai blowing past Trent Brown Monday in practice. Trent Brown is back on the field. He's getting his game legs. He's getting his practice legs, then game legs. And I think Trent Brown will be fine once the games come around, and he's just not a practice guy. He wasn't that way with the Patriots, wasn't that way with the Raiders. Practice is not necessarily his thing. He realizes it's a necessary evil. That's why it's going to be really hard to judge Trent Brown by anything he does in practice. That's how I read that.
I mean, all you can take at this point is what his offensive line coach said about him, and Frank Pollock was pretty fired up about Trent Brown yesterday. So
he was.
That's all we can take right now about Trent Brown because you just haven't been able to see him. But Frank Pollock and the Bengals, they know what they're doing, and they seem like they are pretty thrilled about what he can do for them. So.
Well, I think they actually, he's going to miss some time in camp, no question. Amarius Mims out with a strained pec, but I think they've dodged a bullet because it's non-surgical. I also think they dodged a bullet with Charlie Jones, banging knees. Yeah. When he left on a cart on the brand new turf, the first practice on the brand new turf on Thursday, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. First day on this new surface, and that happens. And then we come to find out Andre Yoshavash dropped the little hint after that practice that he thought someone banged knees with Charlie Jones. That, I guess, turned out to be the case. He's still week to week, but that was a bullet dodged.
No, absolutely. And Charlie Jones, my initial thought was, what bad luck for Charlie Jones, because he's looked like he's really starting to understand the playbook better and getting his timing down with Burrow, and he's going to play a role at some point this season. And then also was the best punt return option the team had. And so, yeah, like you said, they dodged a huge bullet, and super glad that that's not a long-term injury for Charlie Jones, because that would be brutal.
What have you thought of the Dax Hill, DJ Turner dynamic, the competition so far?
I thought that Dax put his best foot forward after the preseason game. And I guess heading into the preseason game, I probably thought DJ Turner had the leg up on him, just from like a consistency standpoint in camp. But DJ Turner hadn't really made any like eye-popping plays in training camp practice. He was just consistent. But Dax made plays, and I will never forget Chuck Burks, the Bengals cornerbacks coach, reaction when I asked him about Dax. Like, he truly was like, he just wants to blitz and cover, and that's all he wants to do. And when you're at corner, like, all you have to do is just like worry about your matchup and covering. And like, safety just didn't seem to be the right fit for all the things that come along with being a safety. And so I think at this point, right, like, I think we'll see how it plays out. These two joint practices are going to be huge, because you'll get to see Dax and DJ against some really good receivers in Chicago this week, and then again in Indy. So I think the battle's far from over, but I'd have to say, like, Dax impressed me in the preseason game. And then clearly he impressed the coaching staff enough, because he was running with the ones yesterday at practice and DJ Turner was with the twos. So, I mean, you try to not read too much into things, because they like to bounce them back on, different days. But I thought it was noteworthy, right?
I've actually thought too that Lou has shown a little bit more dime with 6 defensive backs than we're accustomed to seeing. And it might be a hint, maybe not. Maybe he's just trying to get a feel for what they would look like more in dime, because they have so many defensive backs now. They want to get a feel for maybe going with a dime look a little bit more often could be the way to go. Maybe the way to get more playmakers in there. Look, I think Josh Newton as a rookie could be a playmaker.
I was waiting. How long
it
is
was
this
coming.
podcast?
You knew it was
before
coming.
you
Josh
dropped
Newton,
Josh
like
Newton.
Dax Hill had an interception in his first preseason game of his NFL career. Josh Newton. I'll tell you who's impressed me more than Josh Newton. I think Dejon Anthony, I really, to be very fair, knew nothing about him coming out of Ole Miss. Knew nothing about him. And what I've seen, his communication, his aggressiveness, his ability to make plays on the ball, I've really been very impressed. He had the one interception, I believe it was, on Burrow in 7-on-7s, and he had another interception on Jake Browning in 11s. I just think he's made a lot of plays on the ball, and he's been really communicative. And he and Josh Newton are pretty tight at the hip, very close friends. I've liked what I've seen from Dejon Anthony.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he's been really good. And you always wonder, like, the 7th round pick, like, are they going to make the team?
Right.
But how about, like, if Andre Yoshivas and Dejon Anthony end up being big-time players for this team, like, then you're like getting a lot out of your 7th round picks. Like, that's good for the Bengals personnel department, right? Like, they both,
and they should take a bow if that indeed is the case. Not only that they make the team. I mean, a lot of teams feel that we should keep every draft pick that we draft, but when you're the Bengals and you drafted 10 players, I don't know if you're going to be able to keep 10 players.
Right.
Like Tanner McLaughlin, the tight end, I don't think is making the team. Yeah, I think he'll make the practice squad. That is a possibility. But I mean, in terms of making the first 53.
He hasn't done, I don't think I've said out loud, wow, that was a good catcher. I don't feel like I haven't noticed Tanner McLachlan in practice at all.
I would agree. I just don't think he's gotten the reps and hasn't had the opportunity. Eric All Jr., on the other hand, he got a little bit of run with the 1s in 7s in the red zone on Monday. And that, it's a little thing, but it's something for a guy who's coming off an ACL injury, who didn't even think he would be active until close to the first preseason game. He's cleared pretty much every hurdle about 2 weeks ahead of schedule. That's what's impressed me about Eric All. And then he gets on the field and he's holding his own.
Yeah, I think that it's been too hard to really evaluate him because it's been so limited. But I will go back to my conversation with tight ends coach James Casey, and he was really saying it takes a really special person to be able to come in as a rookie tight end and make an impact, because you have to know the passing game, the run game, you have to know it all. And he was like, it's really hard on rookies at first to come in and digest all of that. So I think that was good intel for me to pump the brakes really on evaluation of rookie tight ends, because sometimes it just takes them a little bit to really understand all that's going on.
Excellent. Yeah.
And I think that's where the luxury of having Tanner and Mike Gesicki really comes in, because not only is Eric All going to have to worry about getting all of that, down in terms of the Bengals playbook, he's also still coming off of an ACL surgery. So I think they're in a really good position to, if they do view him as potentially one of the guys that can make a big impact, they don't need to rush him into anything, because they have two other super reliable options in Tanner and Mike Gesicki.
It also explains what you just said, also explains why they love Drew Sample, because there is so much to the position.
How did I forget Drew Sample? Yeah.
And Drew Sample, I will never forget what Zach Taylor said. He does so much for us and does it at a high level that people don't understand and people don't see. That's why we love Drew Sample. So,
yeah. Well,
anything else
with what James Casey said? So,
anything else you're working on as you get ready to go to Chicago?
No, I will be in Chicago with you. I'll have observations from the practice and then game coverage, of course. So looking forward to it, and looking forward to a week in Chicago.
I'm looking forward to two things: searching out the Hard Knocks cameras. That's point number one for me. That's point number, it's my first goal on the checklist on Thursday. And number two is going to Wrigley Field for the first time on Friday. I am really we have to get into Wrigley on Friday.
I know. I'm also looking forward to seeing Caleb Williams. I feel like I didn't get to see him play a lot in college last year because of USC's games would always be on so late. And I feel like there was just a lot of excuses made for Caleb Williams in college in terms of the talent around him at USC. And USC was kind of a letdown last year in terms of they were supposed to be way better than they were.
5 games.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see him on the stage with his receivers in Chicago, because as a football fan, I mean, they claim, he's generational talent at the position. So I'm excited to watch him take some reps against Cincinnati's defense, aren't you?
He made a throw against the Buffalo Bills on whatever it was, Saturday, across his body, 20 yards down the field. And I went, that's the Caleb Williams that everybody thought 2 years ago was an absolute lock to be the best quarterback when he came out. And that was the kind of throw he needs to make more often. But he's a rookie quarterback. He's going to make rookie mistakes. But they say he's a generational talent. It would be great to see him go up against Joe Burrow. And it's not going to happen, but at least in this game, it would be interesting to see how the two approach the game in very different styles. Joe Burrow is a number one first round overall pick because of the way not only he throws the ball, but the way he reads the field. Caleb Williams has, as you said, generational skills, physical skills, and traits at the quarterback position.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I appreciate you joining me, Kelsey. I'm looking forward to a fun time in Chicago. Want to plug what you have coming up on the Enquirer, just the basic coverage coming up on the Bengals?
Yeah, and if you, like I mentioned a couple times on this podcast, if you're interested in hearing any more about specific position groups, I have interviews with cornerbacks coach Chuck Burks, tight ends coach James Casey, and wide receivers coach Troy Walters, all up on the Cincinnati Enquirer Bengals Beat podcast. Check it out.
She is Kelsey Conway, does an amazing job covering the Cincinnati Bengals for Cincinnati.com and the Cincinnati Enquirer. You can follow her there, of course. Follow her on all of her social channels. What's the it's Kelsey L. Conway, right? On the X.
Mm-hmm.
Impressed that I recalled that right off the top of my head. All right. She's Kelsey Conway. I'm Mike Petralia. This episode of the Jungle Roar podcast, powered as always by our good friends at the Game Time app and Prize Picks. Until next week, keep that jungle roaring.